Good morning from Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, where I'm work vacationing. This is Atilla Yeşilada, your loving and caring host of Real Turkey Channel. You are at Real Turkey Channel, which is a real channel broadcast in English from Turkey, one of the few channels that do so for no reason whatsoever. We just thought you might want to know about Turkey. And today I want to talk about Idlib, the clashes in Idlib, and why Turkey cannot abandon Idlib to the Syrian National Army or the Assad regime. Idlib is a province in Syria between Aleppo and Turkey. It is the last bastion of Syrian rebels in the northwest towards the Mediterranean Sea. It's currently divided into two parts, cut by two highways, M4 and M5. To the south and east, the Syrian National Army and the Assad regime controls the Idlib province. The rest is controlled by rebel militia, which are closely allied by Turkey. To be perfectly honest, some or most of those militia are not very nice people. They are ex-al-Nusra, ex-ISIS, the head-cutting, liver-eating type of fundamentalists that you don't really want to introduce to your family or associate with in a bar. Not that you would see them in a bar unless they want to blow up the bar. Nevertheless, in wars, you have unpleasant allies. That's the reality of a war where, everything goes. Why is Turkey in Idlib? Why is Turkey in Syria? I mean, what are we doing in other Syrian provinces like Afrin, Al-Bab, Azaz, to the east of Euphrates? The fact is, if Turkey were to completely dissociate from the Syrian affairs, the likely situation in Syria would be a two-partite government with the east side of the Euphrates governed by some type of autonomous Kurdish regime and the rest of the country controlled by Assad. I am not against Kurds having their own government, but unfortunately, the current structure among Kurds in Syria is infiltrated by the terror organization PKK. And if they were to establish an autonomous region or independence, it is highly likely that the regime would allow PKK terrorists to infiltrate Turkey from a much broader geography or disseminate propaganda, separatist propaganda. So as unpleasant as it may be, having a buffer zone between the Kurdish entity to the east of Euphrates and Turkey, called the safe zone, has become a necessity to protect, Turkey's southern provinces. There has been atrocities against the local population, as the press and human rights organizations report. I admit that these need to be taken seriously and fully investigated, and the culprits need to be taken to justice. I don't approve them, but this is not a personal video. It's a war. It's a diplomacy video. And I'm talking about realpolitik. We also cannot allow Assad to declare victory in Syria, simply because in that case, the 4 million Syrians in Turkey will never go back. They're 90% Sunni, whereas Assad is an Alawite or Alawi. They're similar to each other. I don't want to get into the details, though they're not the same thing. Assad doesn't like Sunnis. In fact, he would rather have a Syria where he is currently importing poor Afghani and Iranian Shia villagers to repopulate Syria. There are several pieces of academic research among Syrian Sunnis who live in Assad-controlled areas who complain about discrimination and persecution. There are several studies among Syrians in Turkey who say they'll never go back to an Assad regime. Also, every poll that asks the question in Turkey finds that after economic distress and unemployment, Syrian refugees are the third complaint of the Turkish voter. On average, 13% of the participants say they don't want the Syrian refugees. So for AKP government, sending back the Syrian refugees has become the second priority after improving the Turkish economy. And the way to send Syrian refugees is to persuade Assad into a peace where he shares power with the opposition, which would consist of Sunnis, and the Sunnis would be able to have some control over the judiciary and the parliament and the police and the other security forces to make sure that their sect, their denomination, their faith is not discriminated against. This is why Turkey is in Syria. I don't think Turkey has any territorial ambitions. Besides, there is not much in Syria to have any ambitions about. I mean, the country is leveled. And Idlib is extremely important in this respect, simply because of a ruthless carpet bombing campaign by the Russian Air Force and Take No One Alive campaign by the Syrian National Army. 700,000 people, poor refugees, have piled up at the Turkish border. Turkey doesn't want to allow them in, which is inhumane, I know, but I told you about AKP's political difficulties. They are currently living under squalid conditions, and believe me, even in Syria, it gets very cold around this time of the year. UN and human rights organizations predict that if Idlib city, the biggest city in the province, falls to Assad, another 500,000 might flock to the Turkish border. At some point, Turkey will have to admit these people, in which case we'll have more than 5 million Syrians. This creates political problems, as I've said, but it also creates deep economic problems. Clearly, these people want to work. They're illegal workers. They undercut wages, and they contribute to the unemployment problem. The unemployment problem is big. Yesterday, Turkstat announced November employment data. Non-farm unemployment is 50.5%, something like that. And if you assume you have 5 million Syrians living in Turkey forever, that will never go down because these people will take jobs at 1/3 of the wages of the average Turk. Also, we really don't have the health budget or the schooling budget to take care of these people. Already, crime, prostitution, and drug peddling among Syrians is very high. I don't blame the people. You know, you survive as best as you can. But we are raising a Syrian youth population in Turkey which is full of hatred and agony, and they're going to become a serious problem. This is why Turkey needs to stay in Idlib and defend Idlib city and most of the province. Unfortunately, Russia is not cooperating, and President Erdogan puts a lot of value on the strategic alliance with Russia. That needs to change. If we want to stay in Idlib then Russia must understand that we're willing to sacrifice our cherished strategic partnership with Russia. There are a lot of people who say attack Assad's army, Russian Air Force would bomb Turkish forces. That's not going to happen because Russia has a lot of investment interests in Turkey. Turkish Stream, the natural gas pipeline, Akkuyu nuclear reactor. Turkey could easily stop these and make Russia pay heavily, not to mention the S-400 anti-missile systems, which had cost more than $3 billion so far, which we won't pay for. So Russia will probably stay on the sidelines if we read them the Riot Act. And I think the Turkish army is more than capable of pushing Assad back simply because we're fighting very close to our borders. We have numerical superiority, armor superiority, air force superiority. I don't like war, but I'm not a pacifist. I think when national interests are seriously at stake, war becomes a necessity, sometimes to avoid more casualties and permanent damage to a nation's future. It becomes unavoidable to engage in war with other nations. And I'm afraid that's what Mr. Erdogan will discover. He has given Assad until end of February to draw back to previous borders. I don't want to give you details, but to relinquish most of Idlib to the rebel militia or Turkish observers. Assad is not going to do it unless Russia really puts the squeeze on him. And the only way for Erdogan to get anything out of Russia is to threaten to end the strategic alliance. So, to cut the long story short, I think the Turkish-Russian strategic alliance is in deep trouble. It is quite possible for Turkey to return to the United States and EU to counterbalance Russian influence. B, unfortunately, a war in Idlib between Turkey and the Syrian National Army, that's the Assad regime, is very likely. Both investors and Turkish observers need to be ready for this eventuality. You have listened to another prophetic broadcast from Atilla Yeşilada, the loving presenter of Real Turkey channel. I'm hoping one day to have good news from Turkey. For now, Atilla Yeşilada out.